Okay, so in this session what we wanted to do was present the results of our study and just go through what our actual study was as well. So as you would know, the researchers on this project was myself, Dr. Jane Menzies, Professor Stuart Orr, Pat Madamaj as well, and also our colleagues from the Open University of Hong Kong, Professor Alan Au and Dr. Jeremy Chan. And they assisted with us conducting interviews in China and also in Hong Kong as well. Okay, so I guess overall, and I said this earlier before, our objectives of the workshop, but also the study, is to kind of gain a better understanding of the issues that Australian SMEs are facing in the Chinese market, and also a better understanding of internationalising innovations to China as well. We hope also that out of this workshop that you can also gain some contacts and networks in Guangxi. Obviously China is very contact network and Guangxi based country, or that's very important. And actually one of our key findings of our study was that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is that participants really thought that trade missions or international visits led by local councils and so on were really helpful in being able to connect with other Australians who were also doing business in China. And through making those connections, we can help raise our literacy and our capability and understand China in a better way. So that was also one of our objectives of this workshop. So these are some of the past publications that we have done as a result of our past study. And I just wanted to highlight that to you, and you might be interested in purchasing our book. The original report that we did on the 40 larger companies is also available on the internet as well. So it's actually available on our Australian Small to Medium Enterprises website as well. So you can also read about some of the issues that larger companies face. Also in the book, what we try to do is kind of, if we looked at something like culture, how, as a business person, do you deal with culture? What are some of the strategies that you might want to use to, assist with dealing with culture, or how you can tackle those types of issues. Okay, so, what's going on crazy? So why this is just a little bit of our background, and why did we actually conduct this study? We really wanted to follow on from the last project that we did, because we did the study the last study in 2007, 2008, but we know that a lot of things have changed, so things like the global financial crisis, and other issues, and things like the slowdown in the mining sector and slowdown in investment and so on, meant that we wanted to kind of reinvestigate the issues. As we've sort of discussed before, we wanted to also focus on small to medium enterprises, I guess because of the importance of SMEs, and SMEs actually make up quite a large amount of the Australian economy, and therefore it's significant. I've got a few statistics later down the track about how many SMEs and their contribution to Australian economy, and I'll talk about that later. Okay, so it was also motivated because of the Australia in the Asian Century White Paper. So some of you might have read that, which was a part of the former Labor government's strategy about how to engage in Asia and how to build capabilities and literacy in people and in businesses. Okay, so that was one of the major motivations, and we also looked at the white paper was also emphasising the role and the importance of innovation, and that's important because our companies need to think about how they can be more innovative or how they can do things differently, whether it's offering new products or services or whether it's other things such as being more efficient or having more kind of like improvements within their organisation. Okay, so Australia's, I guess, advantages, as I said before, in other industries like car manufacturing have been eroding, and so therefore it's important that we're focusing on other areas and developing a national competitive advantage in innovation-based areas. Okay, so that's where the role of innovation comes into play. Okay, so we all know of the importance of the Australia-China relationship as well. We know of, and we've just listened to John talk about some statistics about Australia's relationship and trade and so on. Then there's also been an increased focus on innovation, not only from Australia but also China. Some people might have read China's 5-year plan from 2011, and one of the key focuses of that 5-year plan is developing an innovation-based society or economy. And so statistics reveal that something like $10 trillion worth of R&D has been invested into industries such as healthcare, biotechnology, clean tech, IT, online media, materials and high-end manufacturing in China, which basically suggests that that investment will result in a more highly innovation-focused economy. You could argue that there is challenges to China actually engaging in innovation because of the changes that China has needed to make as a result of it moving from a centrally planned economy to being a market-based economy. Okay, so some other statistics in China, there are something like 20,000 technology companies, 500 universities, 400 incubators, 5,900 top researchers, 1 million people working in innovation-related fields, and also they have seen a high influx of sea turtles, so those individuals who've been educated in Western countries and then have since returned home to China. So therefore that's developing a greater focus on innovation. In addition, if we look at Australia, we've also been focusing on innovation. In 2013 to 2014, Australia invested something like $8.6 billion into innovation. And that's actually 2% of gross domestic product investment into research and development. Okay, if we compare to China and Australia, Australia's R&D spend has been growing by 8% in comparison to China, which has been growing at 22%. Okay, Australia is famous for a number of innovations and new products. Can anyone think of any products that Australia has developed or is famous for?
The Wi-Fi, the black box, flight recorder,
yes.
penicillin,
Cochlear.
Yeah, so wine
cask.
Yeah, so security and polymer notes, IVF technology, the Hills hoist, etc. So it shows that Australia is a smart country. We can focus on innovation. We have plenty of examples of small to medium enterprises in our study that have used innovation in their products and services. And therefore that kind of gives, I guess, a lead for other firms to also consider that as well. Because of the restructuring of our economy, it also means that by using R&D and by using innovation, it may help lift the performance of smaller organisations as well. So it can help Australia in reviving productivity and it can also help us in tackling pressing economic, social and environmental challenges. Okay, so that is important for us so that we can remain competitive into the future and that we just don't rely on our resource or our resource-based or other industries such as education, etc. Okay, so just looking at the context for our Australia-China business relationships, and this is something that John has already talked about. Obviously, we can see different economic growth rates between Australia and China, 2.5% versus 8.6% in terms of the average rate for the last 5 years. We can also see differences in population size, with China being 50 times, almost 50 times the size of Australia, with Australia being China's #1 trading partner. But on the reverse, China is, or Australia is China's 11th trading partner. So that might suggest that China is very important for Australia, but maybe Australia isn't as important for China as the other way around. Okay, and we can also see the differences in gross domestic product, with China being much larger than Australia. Okay, and that's just our trade relationship between the two countries. Total trade in 2013 was $141 billion. And we can see the levels of investment both going into China and also Chinese foreign direct investment, which has been controversial. Okay, so looking at the importance of small to medium enterprises, we can see that they contribute significantly to the Australian economy. The Australian Bureau of Statistics reveals that they account for half of private sector employment in Australia and also contribute to 1/3 of industry value. 41.6% of small to medium enterprises were exporting or engaging in international trade. So that suggests that they are international and conducting international business. When we look at the statistics about China, we can see that Australia, there's 5,943 exporters that are exporting to China, and that doesn't include, or it's not from an SME perspective, so it could also be larger organisations as well. But we can actually also see that the statistics for SMEs exporting to China is increasing. So some statistics are suggesting that that's also increasing as well, and that Australian SMEs are exporting the same amount to China as what they are doing to Europe. So that's suggesting a greater participation of small to medium enterprises. So what is it about SMEs that might be challenging? And one of the challenges is its resources, or the resources of SMEs, because of their size. But there are also a number of other challenges which kind of tie into the resource-based issue. So if we're looking at this idea of we need to develop capabilities, if we're a 1-2 person small to medium enterprise, then it's going to be very difficult for us to actually get the knowledge about China, have the time to engage in the Chinese market. We know that culture is very important and relationship building is very important. But if we have small to medium enterprises and they're constrained by time, then that means that it's more difficult for them to actually build those relationships, have the funding to actually fly over to China, spend time in China. And it's sort of like the opportunity cost. Maybe we need to be focusing on our business in Australia. So that's some of the issues. Just a little bit more statistics. So the role played by innovation, and John also talked about this a little bit. We're seeing an increasing middle class in China, and their incomes are also increasing as well. So statistics by McKinsey suggest that the Chinese middle class income could be anywhere from $9,000 to $34,000 per year by 2020. We're also seeing a greater urbanisation of the Chinese economy as well, or Chinese population. Current urbanisation rates are at 54%, and the government is hoping that 60% of China's 1.35 billion population will be urbanised by 2020. So again, that suggests other opportunities for small to medium enterprises. So those companies that are providing design services or architectural services, companies that are designing urban spaces, etc., to go along with that urbanisation. As I've noted before, the Chinese economy is also becoming more innovative with a lot of investment, and there's also been a focus on greater like sustainability and environmentally friendly businesses. Again, Australia has been quite successful in having clean tech organisations or environmentally focused SMEs that can provide products and services or to the Chinese market. Okay, so this is our conceptual model that we looked at for our study. So really what we started to do was look at this we looked at kind of, what is an SME and what are some of the issues. And as I said before, potentially they could be limited by their internal resources. So their staffing, their ability to keep up relationships, funding, time, knowledge, and other things like innovative capabilities. So that's, I guess, the context of our small to medium enterprise. They might experience a motivation for their internationalisation to China, whether it's their ability to sell a product in the market, whether they're using China as a low-cost production location, or whether they're using just trying to develop new business or new opportunities. Okay, so then the SME focuses or has a unique challenge in the Chinese environment. And these are issues that other businesses also face. But because the SME is constrained by resources, it might make it more difficult for them to look at culture or develop language capabilities. They might have challenges with infrastructure, legal system, intellectual property issues, etc., etc. Okay, so innovative firms may also be experiencing kind of issues with their acceptance of innovation. And when I get into the results, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, we've got a country that's not as developed as what Australia is. So if we're offering products that are accepted in Australia, those products might not be accepted in the Chinese market. And that might be because of current incomes in China, the fact that Chinese consumers might not want to pay for innovative products, and that price is a factor. Infrastructure can be other issues as to why the SMEs might find challenges also. Okay, so then our last part of our model is that SMEs probably need all the help that they can get in their internationalisation. So they need to be looking at their internal funding, whether they can get their government support, either through local councils or through DFAT or through state-based support as well. They need to develop their networks in the Chinese market, and once networks are developed, then their business will be facilitated and grow afterwards. Okay, our SMEs also need to sort of take a bit of an innovative approach towards marketing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that a bit later. But if you're not online, you're not online. So really, there's very much a focus for SMEs to have online strategies. But having said that, relationships are also, or relationship marketing is also important. And the final part of our model is having appropriate HR practices. Okay, so what did we do? We went around and we conducted 1 hour long interviews with 40 small to medium enterprises that were Australian, that were doing business in China. And that just represents the different industries that we covered. So it was anywhere from business and property services, which made up a major part of our sample. So your consulting type organisations, manufacturing, biotechnology, etc. Okay, so we also asked about their entry notes, and so that's just describing the sample that we investigated. And most of our companies, or a majority, were using wholly owned foreign entities or WOFEs. Some were exporting, some had relationships and doing importing, and other firms were establishing a Hong Kong-based business. A lot of businesses were doing that because of the complexities of the Chinese rules and regulations, and also for the capital requirements associated with Chinese WOFEs, which can be expensive and can be more difficult for SMEs to be able to afford that capital. But also the Hong Kong-based business was much easier for a lot of SMEs to actually do things like invoicing and so on. So that was sort of, I guess, like a characteristic of the sample, but also a finding. Okay, so we did our interviews in Melbourne. So we did, I think it was probably about 10 interviews in Melbourne. We also travelled to Shanghai and did about 15 interviews in Shanghai. Then went to Hong Kong, did a number of interviews there, and also with our research partner, and also interviews in Guangzhou. So we've got like a relatively, diverse sample. There could have been other places to go, but really what we were looking for is where there was a bit of a concentration of Australian businesses. And this might also be reflective of where the Australian Chambers of Commerce are based as well in Australia. So just a bit of a map. Okay, so what did we find about innovation? And feel free to ask questions as we go along, actually, if you want to clarify things. Okay, so what was it about innovation? Were these companies using innovation? Yes, they were, but it was in many different forms. So it wasn't just that we interviewed biotechnology companies who were developing new diagnostics for a test for AIDS, or it wasn't just that we were interviewing companies that had developed a new product to sell in the Chinese market. So our companies talked about either having radical game-changing innovations that they had developed in Australia, or some were actually using China to actually do research and development. So a number of biotech companies were actually engaging in that. We also found that companies were sort of doing this kind of continual improvement, or that's what they saw innovation as being. So therefore, if a company was like improving their processes, or they were using China as a sort of a low-cost location, or changing around the way that they did things, so as to get greater efficiencies in their cost structure. So there's examples of that in the report. So a range of innovations were mentioned, and they either include our product-related new products that they were offering to the Chinese market, or even developing new markets. And some companies even saw providing business or doing business in China as their innovation. Others were management tools and efficiency. Others were e-based innovations, so using the online technologies or online platforms that China had to facilitate further market their businesses. And therefore that was sort of seen as like their e-innovation. Some companies were even looking at how they would translate Western social media, such as Facebook, into Chinese social media. So that was quite an interesting example because of the differences that obviously Facebook and Twitter, etc., are blocked in China. So it's good to be able to have an opportunity to translate companies' social media into the Chinese market. Okay, other companies were looking at or using engineering-related innovations or improvements. Architectural companies saw that their designs that they were using in the Chinese market were innovative, or the way that their companies were. Okay, so it was often, and when we were asking about innovation, a lot of companies kind of said, well, you know, we're not really convinced about whether innovation is the way to go in China. Maybe it's about being more focused, and that's especially for small to medium enterprises because they're constrained by resources, but also because sometimes innovations weren't accepted. Either it was cultural, there was a cultural reason Chinese consumers simply don't like a particular type of product. It was perhaps a lack of development in the marketplace. And I'll give you a specific example. So one company providing architectural services talked about the provision of green rated energy buildings. So basically, one of the participants said that we normally provide 7-star energy ratings or environmentally friendly designs. But builders in China, and hence consumers in China, are just not interested in those types of innovations. And it's because builders were very focused on price and cost, so obviously improving your environmental service of the building is more expensive for the consumer, and the consumer doesn't care yet. So it kind of just shows this lack of, not lack of development, but it just shows a difference between the mindset of the consumer to what a consumer perhaps in Australia might want to what a consumer in China might want. Okay, so companies were finding issues for infrastructure. So obviously the main one was the internet and unreliability of using technology such as Skype and etc. Also, some companies providing security fencing in China were also experiencing the lack of kind of infrastructure that they would normally be used to in Western markets. Okay, so perhaps a lot of consumers are focused on price. So what we kind of concluded, or what we thought, was that we need to look at a company needs to look at its innovation, and it needs to say, is it going to be accepted by the Chinese market? We can't just, and most of us would know that we need adaptations, or we need to look at our products and adapt our products or services to the Chinese market or to foreign markets. Okay, so therefore we thought that innovation, when we enter China, would be appropriate to kind of, adapt the product and make it suitable for the Chinese market. We might need to engage in research and development with consumers. We might need to look at other things. So therefore, innovation should be a part of the process of internationalising to China as well. And of course, it was important for Australian companies, these SMEs, to use innovation to keep ahead of the pack. And that also relates to intellectual property, which I'll focus on a little bit down the track. Okay, I'm going to pass this on to Stuart, who's just going to talk about culture, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, so you're aware of the cultural issues associated with the differences in cultures between Australian culture and Chinese culture, and James touched on a few of the factors already, so we'll just run through this fairly quickly. Guangxi is an important dimension. In our research, we found that there was a little bit of a variation across China, as you would probably expect, but it's a little more pronounced than it was in our previous project in 2007. And we found in some of the more economically dynamic cities and ones that have been economically dynamic for longer, there was an increasing prevalence of more Western styles of networking than previously. And so the participants basically reported the fact that Guangxi had a role to play, but it wasn't nearly as predominant as it was, say, 7 years ago. And as a result, they were also able to participate in to what would be to a Western person fairly familiar sorts of networking and cultural activities. And they also found that increasingly the gap had reduced somewhat between the cultural expectations that they took from their home country, but probably more importantly, that the rest of their business in Australia had, and so tended to push out to the Chinese subsidiary, and the environment that they operated in. And we also found that in a similar vein, local networks of other foreign companies were able to provide a greater level of opportunity and support than in the past. So these networks, for example, through the Australian Chambers of Commerce in the various cities, seem to be able to provide more opportunities now using their Australian cultural behaviours than they were in the past. So they weren't just for mutual support, they were actually able to develop opportunities there. So the gap did seem to have shrunk a little, and that certainly made life a bit easier. We spoke to a number of these sea turtles that Jane referred to before, and it was quite interesting. They really just sort of moved rather freely between the two cultural paradigms, both in terms of the way they ran their business and the way they reflected on the business environment that they experienced. And so that was interesting. It was almost like there's a two-speed thing going on, but the two areas seemed to, or the two different cultural ways of doing business did seem to pretty much overlap or merge. They weren't completely independent activities. So that was probably one of the most interesting cultural findings that came out of the project. But certainly building relationships is true in any environment, more true in China without question, and that's still very much the case. It was more the mechanisms that you used to do it were shifting subtly. Maintaining those memberships, again, the more perhaps traditional Chinese approach was still prevalent, but as I said, a little moderated by the fact that other approaches also seemed to have significant impact. And probably this was most pronounced in Shanghai, where we found that a really large range of relationship maintaining practices could be adopted with equal degrees of success. Generally, however, and I think this is true in any country, but clearly more so in China, if you weren't well liked by the organisation, as you didn't have a good relationship, you hadn't established a substantial basis of trust, then you were unlikely to get business. And this reflects the approach, which is still very dominant, towards making agreements. The common law, even in Australia, says if you make a verbal agreement, you've made an agreement. We tend to focus very heavily on pieces of paper and what's written on the pieces of paper, but in actual fact, even in Australian law, if you strike an agreement, that's what that is. And that's much more so, of course, in China, where the contract is really just, in some cases where it was technical, the contract really did contain some important technical facts where they'd basically been nailed down and recorded. But the broad tentative agreement, and most importantly, what that Chinese customer was going to viewed as the real arrangement, and what they were most likely to honour was, in actual fact, the verbal agreement and the discussions that had gone before. So naturally enough, trust is a very important dimension of that, and we found that was still absolutely the case. And although arbitration and even dealing with issues in the court environment had become much better developed and more sophisticated and greater opportunities. There, predominantly, that was still a very minor dimension of managing contracts and relationships and any issues. Trust was still way up as number one, as the principal mechanism for negotiating arrangements, for maintaining relationships, and for securing further business. So you had to be liked, you had to be understood, you had to have some skin in the game, and you had to have shared understandings. So in that regard, as I said, there are a few touch points. This is true in Australia. It's just canted a little sideways. And some of the people we interviewed who had been situated there for Westerners, particularly Australians who'd been situated there for 20 or so years, had really managed to just slide right across into this. And this was for them, it was that difference in how trust is viewed and its role was a very natural thing for them. So it's not really a gap as much as a different position on a continuum there. And so relationship building really started to create some normalisation. It was quite interesting to explore the impacts of other foreign companies as well. And foreign companies such as the American companies, which placed lower emphasis on trust and even greater emphasis on contracts than Australian companies, struggled a bit more. They really struggled to get the same level of entry into industry, and certainly small American organisations find it very difficult there. But the Australian ones tended to fit in on the same spectrum, and they were able to accommodate that. And we're going to talk a bit later about that when we talk about this afternoon, when we talk about innovation, and we talk about the approaches that businesses took to modify their behaviours in the local environment. So where Guangxi was still used, definitely for access to information, strong relationships led to good information flows, deal with unfamiliarity of markets. Now, of course, most of the businesses we spoke to were looking at different parts of China and therefore essentially completely different markets. We certainly found that because they're operating in one city, say Guangzhou for example, meant they probably didn't know very much about the other cities at all. When we spoke to them about the other cities, they expressed a lack of contact and a lack of awareness of those conditions. So those companies wishing to expand, and I'll touch on why they wish to expand in a second, tended to need to use Guangxi very extensively to support that particular information or that expansion. Why they needed to expand? Because the market was so turbulent, even for a small to medium enterprise, they really needed to hedge their bets and be in a few locations. Most of these businesses essentially were successful as a result of opportunity, being in the right place at the right time. And there was a sense that this opportunity could come and go, and so if they were in several markets, then they were really able to balance that. And so even though their presence might be physically quite small, basically it enabled them to shuffle their focus and their attention and resources to the different markets over time as they evolved for them across China. And of course, legitimacy, particularly again, if they were looking at a different city in China, was enormously enhanced by their Guangxi connections. One of the principal reactions that we found this back in 2007, it's still the case, is to bring in people with local contacts. And so people who were originally born in China and have returned, locals were popular, employing them as popular ways of bringing those connections into the organisation, and that was the fastest way. Attempting to build them from scratch, no local connections, was very time consuming and not very effective, and a number of the people we spoke to indicated that this could be like a 10-year exercise and still not be very successful. So they really needed to start with some established contacts within the organisation. So employment was an important part of that. And then as a result of that, there are a whole range of other opportunities: accessing finance, attracting better staff, and retaining those staff were really important dimensions of that as well. It was the end of the culture, wasn't it?
Yes.
So I'll hand it back over to you now.
Okay, so some of the motivations which I talked about before were growth opportunities, the size of the Chinese marketplace, particular types of industries that were opening up, and strategic reasons for some SMEs who were potentially purchasing or acquiring new businesses. So some businesses were actually even going into China without actually having a business there yet and looking to acquire another small to medium enterprise. So that's something that is, like another type of opportunity. Obviously, China and its low-cost location, characteristic meant that that was another attractive reason. Other businesses were also providing services to either Australian companies or to foreign businesses that were doing business in China. So that was another way that SMEs were entering into that market, or was their motivation for entering in. So therefore, kind of following client strategies. We asked our SMEs about the types of problems that they had. So we ended our interview questions with, what's your major issue at the moment? And we actually found that we could categorise or theme these issues into internal-based issues or into external-based issues that companies or SMEs were facing. So it was very apparent that some of the major reasons was this lack of resources, so the lack of funding, the lack of time, the difficulty in getting staff. So if we had a lack of funding, that might make it more difficult for us to get staff. But also it's well known in the Chinese market that getting skilled staff is very difficult, and actually if we train and keep those, we have those staff for a while, that they might leave. So there's a very much high retention or high turnover rates. Okay, so that was a key issue that SMEs were facing. They were also facing issues around keeping up this relationships, building the guanxi. But as I said before, as the guanxi had been built or a company had entered into a network, that seemed to facilitate or further enhance those companies' businesses. Other businesses had issues with managing growth correctly. So what that really meant was that the SMEs needed to focus rather than going, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do all of these other different things. The SMEs needed to look at what they wanted to do, focus on doing it and trying to achieve it rather than being spread over different things. And that also related to managing cash flows as well. Cash flows was quite an interesting one, and also like the amounts of equity that companies had, because it sometimes influenced the types of projects that SMEs could actually engage in. So one SME talked about how they needed to have a certain amount of RMB in the bank. I think it was something like $7 million worth of RMB. And that influenced their ability to get projects of a certain level. So basically they could quote or bid for projects that were $100 million. But if they wanted to go over that level, they needed to have a greater amount of RMB in the bank or capital to do that. So I guess it's about managing those issues, cash flow and equity types of issues. Other companies were talking about how they repatriated their profits, and then they were a bit disappointed that they did that, because they were like, oh, now I need that money to facilitate my cash flow going into the future. So they suggested it was very important to manage that correctly. Okay, other SME issues was developing the appropriate marketing strategies for the Chinese market, and I'll focus on that later. But it was really about, what is the strategy that you're following? Is it this relationship? Is it the online type of approach? Okay, we probably know a lot about these types of things because we hear of all the time of dealing with the Chinese regulatory environment, dealing with the bureaucratic structures. Some company or one businessman talked about how he had to fly back to Australia to get a form notarised, or his passport notarised, so he could do something or set up his bank account, apply for his licence. Those types of issues which impact on the SME. Obviously, building political relationships or the political relationships at the time were also, kind of important. So political relationships between Australia and China had potentially impacted on SMEs and I guess their ability or their perception in the market. Coping with poorer infrastructure and the lack of development of the Chinese market were also problems. Other problems, and this is probably very relevant for SMEs, is problems with getting payments or squeezes on price margins and so on. So companies in the building industry or architectural industry were very much focused on, price margins were very, were getting squeezed. So that meant that, they had to also sort of squeeze their types of prices that they were offering, therefore reducing their profits. So what was it about the skill sets that people needed? So this is all about this capability issue. What do people need? Obviously, the innovation or what the company was providing, it was important that those individuals had a particular skill set. So perhaps if we're talking about an immigration business that we might, want to set up, it was very important that those SMEs, have a very kind of in-depth skills in those areas. It's sort of like if you want to do something in a foreign market, you already need to be good at doing it in your home market before you can do it well in a foreign market that's a totally different ballgame. Okay, our connections and networks, which again relates back into the culture, was very important. Would everyone agree that the ability to speak Mandarin or Cantonese is extremely important for the Chinese market? While we can use translators, our business-to-business communication becomes muddled up and we might not get the direct message that we need. So therefore the ability to speak Mandarin, Cantonese, is extremely important. So I really recommend, and I've been recommending this for many years, is that people develop this capability in themselves. And that's also, I guess, as a result of the lack of English being spoken in China as well. Okay, some SMEs were talking about how, when they're in China, when they're employing people, they're very much focused on, well, we need to employ people who speak English or who can speak both Chinese and English as well, because their business needed English. Okay, educated and knowledgeable staff is also important. Technological advantages. SMEs also talked about their entrepreneurial. So, it's about this luck, this serendipity, this drive, all of those types of things that people needed to, develop their business in China or develop their competitive advantage. Previous China experience was also very important as well. So if you've got some type of experience, whether it's, sort of slowly building up your exporting or slowly building up your trips, that sort of facilitated, your ability to do business later on, or more enhanced business. So very much I see international business or China, or developing business in China, as a very long type of process. It's like you can't just go on a trade mission and then expect that, you'll find a customer and everything will start up. You might need to go on these trade missions a number of times, or visit China, many times to build this business up. Marketing and branding type resources were very important, and these all lead to some form of competitive advantage. Okay, this is where I talk about government support. That's always an interesting one. So we asked our participants, did you use any form of government support for your internationalisation or your business activity in China? And some had used Austrade for their introductions, their referrals, spreading their details to some of Austrade's contacts. Some firms had also used the export market development grants, so the ability to fund our international trips. One company actually even talked about the benefit of the EMDG grants, And basically, one of the benefits was an enhanced ability to get an APEC card. I don't know if anyone's got an APEC card in the room, but they're quite difficult to get within organisations because you have to have a certain amount of business, etc., or meet different requirements. APEC cards are very important for people who constantly need to go to China as well because of the visa issues of having to have multiple visas and so on. Okay, our businesses, our SMEs thought that the Chambers of Commerce, so the AusChams based in Shanghai or based in Guangzhou or Hong Kong, were very important for them. They found that they really allowed them to enter into a network. And once they'd entered into that network, then that helped their business. They met people. Some businesses even had this focus of, I'm going to sort of sell our products or services to, the Australian kind of community within China. Okay, some of the companies also reported that and this is true for Austrade as well, that the level of services, the level of, success that they got out of AusCham or Austrade depended on the location. So the obvious one was that the AusCham in Shanghai had a very large Australian business community, and it also had a very well-developed AusCham and people working there, a well-developed networking group and so on. Where if we looked at Guangzhou, it wasn't as developed, and that might be reflective of the size of the Australian business community in Guangzhou. So they saw that there are differences between Shanghai and Guangzhou and the level of services that were provided. Other companies have gone on state-based trade missions, so the state-based trade missions from the Department of Business Innovation of the Victorian Government. But a lot of these businesses thought of them as a little bit of speed dating for SMEs or for businesses. So they would often go, they would meet with potential customers or clients, they might give their business card, they might receive one, and then on to the next one. And then they would come home with their stack of business cards, and then they would put it in their truck drawer, and then nothing would happen out of it. So maybe, others sort of did find it valuable. But what we sort of concluded was that maybe it's important to take a more concentrated approach to trade missions, really focusing on developing those relationships. Because once we develop one relationship, then that might facilitate us with others. Okay, and then some companies didn't use government support, or what we did find is that they found that the support was available for exporters, but it might not be available for a business or a business person who wants to set up a new business in China. So I've moved to China, I'm going to set up my consulting company there, but I don't have a consulting company back in Australia. But there was no kind of support that they could get, so the Export Market Development Grant. Okay, companies did report that they thought that Austrade could have improved their services, and that they found that the services provided by, for instance, the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, based in Hong Kong, they found that they provided much better contacts and networks than what Austrade could provide. Of course, people have difficulties with paying for Austrade services as well, because they sort of thought, well, Austrade is a taxpayer-funded entity, so why do we have to pay for the services that they're providing? Or if I got an Export Market Development Grant, then to get the services from Austrade, I could use that to pay for some of the services from Austrade. That's right. Anyway. Okay, and then the companies also thought that it was difficult to know what the resources that were available from different levels of government. So what was available from the federal government, what was available from the state, and what was available from local councils. And they really thought, and so we've got the City of Melbourne, or perhaps like the City of Frankston, that might be providing trade facilitation services. So companies really thought that there should be more of a streamlined approach to what all of these bodies are providing, and that there's not too much duplication, and that we know where we can go to get the service that we need. So generally, SMEs thought that the American Trade Office, the British one, provided better services than what Austrade did provide. Okay, so it's still a little bit behind, but so what were the funding issues? Some of the companies had used their own funds or their profits or their built-up equity or savings. So I guess it depends. If we've got our small to medium enterprise, 1 or 2 people, they might be using their own sources of funding for their activity. So some people were using their own money, inheritances or family sources. So quite a successful company, actually, Clark Morgan, who Murray Morgan will be presenting this evening, was talking about how they got a loan from their parents to start up their business and then developed it into a successful business with 30 people currently working in it now. Okay, so the capital requirements were very important for our SMEs and for their WOOFies, and the alternative might be that they might want to set up a Hong Kong entity. But there was a bit of not a criticism, but a bit of a challenge associated with that, because the thought was that the Chinese government don't really like companies doing that, because it's sort of, they're trying to escape the regulations in China. But that was often a method that the SMEs were using. Some industries, such as biotech, had government funding for their innovations and also for their or other sources of government funding. Some companies talked about having private investors based here in Australia, but not listing on the Australian Stock Exchange. Others talked about public donations. Others had used debt finance, but this was very uncommon, and it was also very difficult, if not impossible, for Australian companies to get debt financing from Chinese banks. So, not. Okay, so that was the funding sources. Intellectual property. Some of the companies had IP, some didn't, or some thought that it was important intellectual property that they wanted to protect, and then others just sort of thought, well, I've got intellectual property, so someone can steal it, but I'm just going to expose myself to this. Okay, so the nature of the company's IP was important in terms of protection. And what companies did think that because China is becoming more innovative focused, that they were starting to protect intellectual property more, and therefore respected Western firms' IP more than what they had previously. SMEs did think that they were affected from the intellectual property issue because of being an SME reduced the resources that they had available to spend on getting patents or to spend on getting trademarks and so on. And similarly, it would also affect your ability to pursue cases. So if you're an SME and you're can't really afford to take a company to court or to arbitration, then that was an issue that affected them. So some firms were protecting through patents, trademarks, or more practical means as well. So that might be not taking particular products or technologies to China, or just accepting that some IP might get stolen. Some of the companies had experienced intellectual property breaches. Someone had experienced fraud in Guangzhou. So some company, and I don't quite understand why this happened. Another company was using their company name, pretending to be recruiting people and trying to recruit people under their name. And then, other people were also using their website or creating websites under their name as well. And someone talked about how the person that they interviewed ended up getting bashed up and had their money stolen and tied to a pole or something crazy like that. So that was a small business in SME doing T-shirts and manufacturing. So others thought it was difficult to enforce their intellectual property rights because of the nature of IP theft and the nature of the Chinese economy. Got a sign up in the silk market in Beijing that says protect IP, etc. Okay, so Marketing strategies, it was very important for SMEs to have some form of a marketing strategy. Really, you needed to have something, whether it's this sort of relationship approach, online approach, or, who's your target market? And it might mean that people have to kind of go around and work out who their customers are, but it was important to have something. It was also that it was important for companies to develop their brand. Companies often talked about, we're a very small fish in a very large ocean, China. So it's very important to, have this niche focus and develop the brand in that niche. One company, a recruitment company in Shanghai, basically said once we've developed our brand, we can now call up people and they know who we are. When they first started, sort of no one knew who they were, which therefore impacted on their business. Okay, so the SMEs were using or what we classified as relationship marketing, whether it's through super trade missions, trade fair attendance and exhibitions, industry events, or even using the AusCham network as, we're going to go and speak there, we're going to advertise our services there. So that was their sort of, type of approach. Other companies were talking about online strategies, and I think Maury will talk about this in this afternoon's session. But basically, it was important for companies to have multiple platforms. So it's not just having the website, but also being on the Chinese social media sites. So statistics reveal that quite a significant amount of the population are using either computers or telephone technology. So therefore it's important to have some sort of online strategy. Okay, so it was also very important that an English website was actually translated into Chinese or Mandarin. So I'll just plump your English website there. And the different forms of, whether it's like Weixin, online messaging, or whether you're using Taobao, etc., were important ways of developing business or getting out into the media. So some companies talked about having, like sort of large amount of followers on Weibo, or using Weixin to have customer groups, or even using those online technologies to managing their staff in China as well, so that everyone's sort of communicating with one another. So it was very important to think about that. Some companies talked about how sometimes their products would end up on, these sort of selling sites, sort of like our eBay sites like Taobao, etc., which I think Taobao is seen as a sort of cheaper, like where a lot of the cheaper type products are listed on. But they found that that was very beneficial for their marketing. So there's just some of the ones. Okay, I'm just going to pass this on to Pat, and then we will conclude, and then we might have a break before we go on to
Okay, good morning everyone. Recruiting and managing human resources was another significant challenge experienced by the participants of this study. I would like to just present you some key findings of human resource management aspect of the research. I will go through the findings in the area, basically recruitment and staffing choices, recruitment of staff, training and development, and retaining critical skills. In addition, I would like to go through briefly the key reasons of employee turnover and measures adopted in retaining people. The findings indicate that firms use a variety of approaches recruiting staff to the Chinese business, actually a combination of expatriate and local staff. The findings also indicate that firms value expatriate staff, especially expatriate staff with local experience. They value them as a vital asset for their businesses. The staff was employed using common methods, such as recruitment agencies or web-based services. However, trade hubs and local universities seems a good source for firms. finding young people and train them for their staff guidance. The study revealed that recruitment of the correct people is one of the critical challenges faced by the firms again. This was really complicated by funding issues, particularly in initial stage of the business. The financial restraints caused inability of running proper recruitment campaigns in finding correct people. Due to again funding issues and the fact that SMEs were not that big enough yet to support full-time staff, they use part-time workers and external consultants for things like marketing and a lot of internal small things that they do not need to do every day. For example, part-time bookkeepers or part-time external accounting companies to do their books and accounting. The study also revealed that many firms had no big issues of finding common or basic skilled people in China. However, it was much more difficult than to find people with advanced or technical or professional skills. As an alternative, some SMEs recruit Chinese-speaking people from Hong Kong and Singapore and some other Asian countries, which had the added benefit of having a more global approach to them. Staffing choices. SMEs use a variety of staffing options again, including full-time staff, both expatriate and local, part-time staffs, and especially interns and fresh graduates from universities. The popular one, Chinese sea turtles or hive they call, and Australian-based staff with Chinese background are much popular among them as options. Some firms had resorted using interns as their strategy, which assisted with reducing staff costs really. Most of interns they are become foreigners, and there are companies doing this business in China, and the firms having contact with them, and they just selling short-term China business experience internships in China. That's what they did for many interns. Most of these SMEs in the initial stage had no human resource departments or staffs for different functions of the operations. So, initial stage, the managers do all required functions of the business with little help from part-time staffs or external consultants. The study results also indicate that some firms run their business only by managers without any full-time staffs, just using external consultants or part-time staff. Hiring staffs that could assist with bridging the culture gap proved to be a particular challenge. The findings reveal that firms had a strong preference for recruiting overseas educated Chinese called sea turtles or haiku. The benefit is that they understand both cultures that assist in smooth operations in day-to-day business activities. Participants having exporting business in Australia without having a China office reported that they use Mandarin-speaking people in Australian offices to communicate with their partners in China. Training and development. The training of staff becomes an essential element for Australian SMEs in China in order to develop the right skills. The training and development of staff was also a challenge due to the high turnover rates the participant experienced. Training proved not to significantly increase the company loyalty really, and sometimes departing employees even took innovations with them to start competition in the market. Some participants reported that trained staff would leave the organization within a very short period of time, within 1 to 2 years. So firms have to make extra efforts to retain them and or finding new people to fill that positions left. This is really a costly and time-consuming exercise and disrupt the smooth operations of their businesses. The participants also noted that staff they were able to attract generally did not have strong thinking capabilities, and they suggested that this was due to very informal education system in China. Therefore, SMEs need to work out how they deal with and manage this constraint. firms also commented on the fact that it took a long time to train up Chinese staff to the level that they required. Hence, retention is a critical factor really. Employment turnover and retention have been identified as one of the key challenges faced by SMEs in China. Most of firms involved in this study identified it is as one of the biggest issues they are experiencing in the Chinese market. High amount of turnover causes significant productivity issues for SMEs. Some participants found that magnitude of the retention issue tended to vary between different locations in China, city to town to town, city to city. Yeah. Many firms mentioned how difficult it was to get staff that they could train up to higher level for decision making, as an example. And retaining them in the business was extremely difficult for them. Again, this was another issue for innovative business who also had to protect their innovations. Apparently, some staff left set up competition still in firms' innovation. So, as discussed before, Jen, just protection of IP rights in China is extremely difficult task. Hence, protection is innovation is critical for their survival. What are the reasons for employer turnover? As per the study, the participants said a variety of reasons for why their Chinese staff turnover. This included money, holiday time. For instance, when staff return home for Chinese New Year, they often don't want to return to work. The type of job they were in, again, another issue. For example, sales staff were more likely to jump, whereas secretarial staff were not. One interesting reason for turnover is that Chinese lifestyle, which really encourages savings rather than spending. So, as a result, some people have adequate money to live on without a job or income from a job. So, this means that employee will often live without a job and take a break, and sometimes until their money runs out. This contributes significantly to their employer turnover to some extent. Similarly, because of the job market in China, employees have the perception that they can walk out one day simply and find a job somewhere else next day, some other place. So this perception contributes to employee turnover as well. Others believe that turnover occurred because of inappropriate selection in the first place, or the selection process was really rushed. Finally, the measures adopted by managers in retaining and keep people in the organization. To respond to high expectation of staff, some participants reported that they use a number of approaches to manage retention. This included providing enhanced benefits such as money or highest salary levels in the market, also building trust with employees, developing interesting jobs for employees, for instance, giving staff a variety of different tasks or type of work or multitasking. Some other strategies also used by firms include giving gifts and bonuses during Chinese New Year and Moon Festival time, and building morale of the staff, building the impression that working for a foreign firm can be very attractive because the higher pays, prestige, and skill development opportunities. Motivating staff to be innovative and problem solve was one way that some participants engage with staff as well, and in the process retain them as well. So I think those are the key findings of HR-related matters. In summary, thanks for your attention, and I will hand over to Jay. Thanks.
Okay, so we just wanted to conclude.
So we've covered a range of different issues from an introductory perspective. Later on today we're going to have an exercise and we're going to have some presentations around our findings. But I think we just want to summarise with the following points that you can see up there on the slide. that innovation was something that the SMEs engaged in, but they did have to be clever about how they went about it. They couldn't just hold the innovation up and expect it to necessarily attract an interest or a market. And that was due to the differences in the markets and the difference in terms of what they're interested in and whether innovations were always acceptable in that particular environment for other reasons such as risk, adversity. And so as a result of that, these SMEs experienced a number of different problems, not just because they're a small organisation with limited funding, internal funding and limited access to capital, trying to enter a market that was geographically distant, but also because of these, because of joining networks and needing to adapt the innovations that were successful for them in Australia. As a result of that, they need to develop different capabilities, and we've talked about how employing people with local knowledge provided, locals provided local knowledge and access to networks, and also to develop specific products and services based on what they had produced in other countries, Australia in particular, for the Chinese market. As their funding been an issue, bearing in mind that it typically took these organisations 2 years to start to get in serious business, and as some suggested, another 2 years later, that was pretty much it. That particular business would have come to a conclusion, and they may move on to other things, but it's a relatively short time frame in which to extract a return, and so supporting cash flow is really important. We talked about the difficulties around supporting intellectual property. We'll talk about a bit more about it this afternoon. And relationship marketing and other forms of operational innovation were probably the single most important factors in terms of success. And some of the most successful organisations that we spoke to were very, very dynamic in that particular area. And of course, then there's the HR issues, attracting staff who had the sorts of capabilities that these organisations were looking for. Bearing in mind that they were reflecting a Western business structure and mode of operations in China, they still, even if they changed the structure and the look of the business, there still was inherent in the way the business operated, transferring skills and so forth and knowledge from Australia. There was still a need to have certain skill sets in China, and so accessing the right people who could make decisions, who had the right familiarities, was a big challenge, and that was another important issue. Networks were certainly another way in assisting that.